to this afternoon's session, Universal Credit, When Things Go Wrong, Sanctions, Deductions and Hardship Payments. My name is Gareth. I am one of the trainers here at Society Matters. There is a lovely photo of me in all of my cheeseball glory, and if you attended any of our sessions before, you might remember me saying, I do hate that photo with a passion. So everybody say hello and everybody say goodbye, because we are not going to be looking at that photo again if I have anything to say about it. All right. So, if I may, just in case this is your first time joining us, if I can just give you a little bit of background about myself and about us at Society Matters, just kind of who we are and what we do. So Society Matters, we are the trading subsidiary of Citizens Advice Gateshead. We're actually one of the largest citizens advice in the country. I think we're just pipped to the post by Manchester, but I work for its trading subsidiary. So what we do day to day is we deliver a range of courses on various different, you might call them kind of social welfare issues. So for example, we run courses on universal credit, on the welfare system as a whole, on debt, immigration, housing, homelessness, financial well-being. It's citizens advice. So if you can think of it, then we probably cover it. And we do try and feed the knowledge and the experience that we have as advisors into courses like this today. What's unique about us though is that ultimately all of our profits actually get gift-aided back to the charity to fund the various projects that it has and enable our advisors to do the wonderful work that they do. And on the screen there is just some of the organisations that we're very proud to support and to work alongside. So just a quick bit of housekeeping, if I may. It looks like everybody's done this already. Thank you very much. If I can ask you to keep your microphones on mute just to avoid any kind of background noise, that is very much appreciated. If you have any questions at any point, feel free to ask as we move through the session. Either just take yourself off mute or just pop a message in the chat. I am keeping an eye on it. As I said, there will also be, I've specifically budgeted some time at the end for a bit of a Q&A session also. As I said earlier, I will stop the recording at that point. I'm going to talk for around about 45 minutes, then we'll have some time for any further questions at the end. Shortly after the end of this session today, you will also get a copy of this recording, you'll get a copy of the slides. There will also be some links relevant to what we talk about today as well for you to sort of keep and refer back to in future also. All right. So, in terms of what we are going to talk about today, we're going to cover probably I would call the most common problems people can face when it comes to universal credit. We're going to talk about the impact that those deductions and things like sanctions can have, and we're also going to talk about what support is available when people have their universal credit reduced or sanctioned. Just very quickly before we get into it, so I mentioned earlier, we actually ourselves run a range of courses on various different social welfare issues. We actually run 2 courses on universal credit, and I'll talk more about these a bit more towards the end, but one is an introduction to universal credit and one is advanced. You'll see 2 QR codes on the screen there that will take you to the relevant web page. We are running, the reason I mention this now is we are running a bit of an offer at the moment. There is a code on the screen there that you can use if you get to the end of this session and you think, you know what, actually, I'd like to find out a bit more. You can use that code on the screen and it will get you 20% off either our Introduction to UC course or our Advanced UC course. That code is valid until midnight on the 23rd of July. That's not to say you need to attend the course before then. You just need to book it before midnight on the 23rd of July, and you can use that code to get 20% off, but I will talk more about that at the end.
It's very good. This guy is dead informative. You get the answers out of the
Oh, there's a few people who it looks like maybe taking themselves off mute. Could I be a bit cheeky if I may, guys, and ask you to just pop yourselves back on mute if that's all right? Thank you very much. Urvashi, I can just see you saying, I attended an event recently where a landlord had purchased a property by auction. It's now being purchased. If it's all right, Urvashi, if we can maybe hold that until the end, but I will answer your question, but if it's all right, I'd just like to make a start on the content, if that's all right. But I have seen it and I will answer it at the end as best as I can. All right. So we'll get into it then. What are, first and foremost, some of the most common reasons that universal credit might be reduced? So you can see a few things on the screen there, first of all. So sanctions, firstly, we're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about sanctions. What are they? Why are people sanctioned? What can we do about them? How can we help people mitigate the impact of those sanctions, both the sanctions themselves and the kind of the after effect that comes after, if you like. It might be that we are paying back other types of advances. So perhaps you've got a budgeting loan, for example, maybe you're your fridge broke down, for instance, and you need to get a budgeting loan from the DWP so that you're able to buy a new one, for example. It might be that we are claiming certain benefits alongside universal credit. So that could be things like job seekers allowance or employment support allowance or carers allowance. It might just be that my universal credit reduces because maybe I'm working and actually my earnings, my increased earnings have meant that my UC has reduced through something called the taper rate. The idea that if I'm working on universal credit, for every pound I earn from work, my UC reduces by 55p. It could be other deductions that I face on my universal credit as well. Now, that could be a variety of things, but you'll see some examples there, things like rent or utility arrears. So, for example, it might be that I am paying back utility arrears through the Fuel Direct scheme, where my universal credit is kind of reduced at source, if you like, in order to pay back any utility arrears that I might have. Now, if you kind of break those down a little bit, so thinking, for example, about claiming benefits alongside universal credit like GSA, ESA, or carers allowance. So if I break that down, firstly, new style job seekers allowance and new style employment support allowance, they are benefits that you can claim alongside universal credit. There is nothing wrong with that whatsoever. Right, if you're entitled to both, then by all means go for it if that's what you want to do. But just bear in mind, if we do claim both at the same time, you're not actually going to be financially better off by claiming, say, JSA and UC or ESA and UC, because all that will happen in practice is your universal credit is going to be reduced by the amount of your JSA or by the amount of your ESA. So in practice, financially, you're not going to be better off by claiming both. It might still be worth claiming both if, for example, maybe you are somebody who might struggle on getting, say, one monthly payment of universal credit, because it means with JSA and ESA, they are paid fortnightly. Now, that means that, for example, if I got my UC payment today, in about 2 weeks' time, I'll get my ESA or my JSA. About 2 weeks after that, I'll get a lot of UC. About 2 weeks after that, I'll get my ESA or my JSA. Might find it a bit easier to manage if I'm paid slightly more frequently, but in practice, it is going to reduce my UC in that respect. I'm not actually going to be financially better off by claiming both. Similarly, with carers allowance, again, you are perfectly within your right to claim universal credit and carers allowance. Now, you might be claiming a particular element of universal credit called the carers element. It's an element that you can get, as the name implies, if you are caring for a disabled person. And again, nothing wrong whatsoever with claiming carers allowance alongside the carers element of UC. But if I do claim both at the same time, all that will happen is that my carer's allowance will be deducted pound for pound from my universal credit. So again, in practice, I'm not going to be financially better off by claiming both at the same time. Again, you might be sat there thinking, well, why would I bother? What's the point in claiming carer's allowance and carer's element if I'm just not going to get to keep the money? What's the point? It's to do with, we always say it is worth claiming both if you're able to, and it's to do with the class of national insurance contributions that you get. Now, on the screen here, let me just zoom that in ever so slightly. On the screen here, we have a table from gov.uk about what your national insurance credits cover. So on the screen here, you'll see a list of benefits down the left-hand side, and then you've got Class 1, Class 2, and Class 3 national insurance contributions. Now, when you claim universal credit, for example, you are given Class 3 national insurance credits. You are credited with Class 3 national insurance contributions. So if you look at the different benefits down the side here, we're only really focusing on the columns that say yes. So when I claim universal credit, all it really covers my national insurance record for is my state pension. So I need 35 years worth of national insurance contributions to get the full amount of my new state pension. When I claim universal credit, it'll cover me for that, but it won't really cover me for anything else. When you claim carer's allowance, you will be credited with Class 1 national insurance credits. So again, looking at all of these columns where it says yes, claiming carer's allowance covers me for my new state pension, hooray, but it also covers me for new style job seekers, for ESA, for maternity allowance, for bereavement support payments. By claiming carer's allowance, yes, I'm not financially better off in that respect if I'm claiming it alongside UC, but it protects me, it keeps the door open to other benefits I might be able to claim if my circumstances change in future. And I mention this because unfortunately I have had clients caught out by this in the past. So even though it reduces your UC in that respect, even though, sorry, different way of phrasing it, you're not going to be better off by claiming both. It can still be worth claiming both in that sense. So I want to take a moment to talk about sanctions in particular. Now, I'm a big believer in starting as I mean to go on. So I'm going to ask you one question. Are sanctions fair? Do we agree with sanctions? There is no right or wrong answer. I'm genuinely curious. Please feel free to take yourselves off mute or pop a message in the chat, whatever you prefer. Are sanctions fair? Do we think they are a good thing? Zara, thank you very much. Is just saying no, straight up no. Sharon, bit more mixed in depends. Yes, sometimes, usually no. Depends on the circumstances. Depends, it depends. Okay, a lot of depends. So I'm going to ask you, what does it depend on? When you say it depends, or it depends on the situation or the circumstances, what does it depend on? If it's easier, like I said, feel free to just take yourself off mute. We find they're overused for people with convictions. Often you see money isn't enough to stretch for a household, and sanctions make it harder. Let me just, if I may, I'm just going to scroll back ever so slightly. Alex, if I may, Alex Clark, I'm going to pick on you slightly if that's all right. You said, depends on the circumstances. We find they're overused for people with convictions. Why do you think that might be?
So I work for a charity called Working Chance, and we support women with convictions into employment. And something that we consistently see is that work coaches potentially don't understand other appointments that they have to go to or legal restrictions that they have. And so we find that even the threatening of sanctions is more overused for people with convictions.
Mm. So it's not necessarily about the sanction itself, it's the threat of the sanctions that people are told, like, if you don't do this, then this will happen. Is that right?
Well, yeah, I mean, sanctions have been given unfairly for the women that we find. I mean, we've had instances, for example, where women aren't allowed to work in certain postcodes because of license restrictions or restraining orders. And if they've had an interview, said that you should go in this for this interview
in an area that they're not actually allowed to go to or not supposed to go to. Yeah.
Exactly. And then when they say, no, I can't. And
yeah.
then we've had instances where people have been sanctioned for that.
Did if you don't mind me asking, did they ever challenge that sanction?
They did. And it took about 8 months for it to be overturned. But it's more, it is niche, you know. We do work with people with convictions, but you know, it is something that we sadly see all the time.
Yeah. I mean, on the one hand, I'm glad that we're able to get it overturned. Of course, on the flip side, it's all well and good saying, yeah, it was overturned, but it was 8 months later.
Yes.
But you mentioned there about it being niche. Personally, I would argue that it shouldn't be considered niche in that respect, because when you think like universal credit as a system, right, it's for pretty much the whole of the UK. It needs to be able to accommodate for people with such a range of circumstances. And yes, I am including, you know, people who have license conditions and so on. There should be a way for them to be able to accommodate for that. I mean, the fact that the sanction was overturned, even in and of itself, shows that actually it was perfectly reasonable that the person couldn't attend in that particular postcode in that particular area. That's still a pretty sad indictment that it took the whole appeal process. I mean, do you mind me asking, was it a mandatory reconsideration when it got overturned, or was it at the tribunal?
I believe it went to tribunal, but we've had instances where, you know, they've gone through the appeals process and it still hasn't been overturned. And I say it's a niche issue, but, you know, we know that 1 in 4 people of working age in the UK have a conviction. So it's actually not that niche at all. No. So, yeah, just a tricky one that we seem to face all the time.
Yeah. Like you say, 1 in 4 working people in the UK have a conviction. I think Universal credit, and I don't mean to put words in people's mouths here, but I am curious. Do you think it's for a certain kind of person? Just generally, sorry, that's not aimed specifically at Alex there, so feel free to chip in, guys. No? All right, fair enough. I mean, in the sense that if you are a, let's say, a straightforward case, you know, you don't have any caring responsibilities, you don't have any as a system, sorry, Georgia. So let's say, for example, that I'm just average Joe, run-of-the-mill UC claimant. I don't have caring responsibilities. I don't have a criminal conviction. I don't have health conditions. Do you think it works better in those circumstances? Oh, yes, aimed at a certain person. Oh, yeah. Okay, so maybe I didn't make myself too clear there. Apologies, one of my lights have just went out. That's never mind. Right. Yeah, I don't think the system considers individual circumstances enough to be fit for purpose. Now, yeah, I have some sympathy with the government to an extent because, like I said, they need to, the welfare system needs to be able to accommodate, sorry, for people with such a range of circumstances. How well is one system ever going to be able to do that? But at the same time, it shouldn't be a situation where we kind of, if you'll pardon the expression, we let the perfect system be the enemy of the good. It should still be able to accommodate for people in those circumstances. And certainly a lot of what we see at Citizens Advice is, yeah, I can just see Tiffin saying in the chat there, it's a one-size-fits-all system, doesn't take into consideration the nuances of life. Personally, and I stress it's my completely my personal opinion, I would agree with that. I think you say the system works well if you fit the kind of mold of what the DWP are or think that they are working with. Depends a lot on the work coach too. Yeah, yeah, again, I think there's something in that. There are a lot of fantastic work coaches out there, I'm sure. Equally, without wanting to be too specific, I have worked with the work coaches of certain other persuasions, let's say. So unfortunately, there is that kind of human element also. So just thinking about sanctions then, first of all, just to give us some context, where are we at in terms of sanctions? So firstly, thinking about how common they are. So on the screen here, we have a lovely little graph that shows, apologies, I think there might be something blocking it there. We have a lovely little graph that shows essentially how common sanctions are. From January of 2017 up until, this goes up until January 2026. So this is the most up-to-date data that the DWP released. I think this was just last month, but it only goes up to January 2026. The most common reason for a sanction was simply a failure to attend a work-focused interview. Your work-focused interview, if anyone's not familiar, is just the official name for an appointment with the job centre. You've missed an appointment with your work coach, you've got a low-level sanction. Low-level sanctions accounted for 90.3%, nearly 9 in 10 of all sanctions. The sanction rate itself, in terms of those people who are in what we call conditionality regimes where they are susceptible to sanctions. So, for example, people who are looking for work, for instance, was 5.4% of claimants. So about 1 in 20 people on universal credit who are in conditionality regimes where sanctions can be applied, because some people can be exempted from sanctions in some circumstances. About 1 in 20 people were subject to a sanction in that respect. Right? 5.4%. That's about 2 million people. Again, just to give us some context, 68,000 what we call adverse sanction decisions were, slight typo there, sorry, issued in January 2026. So just in the month of January, there were 68,000 sanctions that were issued. So if you look at this graph, so you'll notice here, January 2017, but we're just shy of 12%, and then it is by and large a downward trajectory. This period here, as it says, changes made to work requirements on the 30th of March. You probably don't need me to tell you, but this was very much the COVID pandemic. So there were some significant changes made, and as you can see, the sanction rate really kind of fell off a cliff in that respect. From about April 2021, sanctions were reintroduced, and you'll see that actually they've went right back up again. But also, what I personally found quite interesting, if you think about for all of this time, we were on this downward trajectory, and then they stopped because of the COVID pandemic. Okay, I get that. Then it went back up again, and we've kind of gone down this downward trajectory again, but certainly nothing like what we see in this period before the pandemic. Do you think there might be a reason for that? Less people claiming UC? Not so much, Sarah, actually. From the COVID pandemic, so when you had, if you remember, like 30th of March 2020, the very much the dark days, if you'll pardon the expression, there was a huge rise in the number of people claiming UC. Massive. In the space of about a week, it went up by about 1.5 million people. It was huge. Understandably, furlough, redundancies, and so on. But even since then, it went up to about 5 million people. But even since then, the number of people claiming UC has continued to go up. So the most recent data, if I remember correctly, there's about 8.4 million people claiming universal credit, actually the highest number that there has ever been. So it's not necessarily to do with the number. Jane, I can just see you popping in the chat there. So standard allowance of UC is given as a sum of money intended to cover the basics. So I feel sanctions and deductions are unfair, have a significant impact on a person's ability to meet basic needs. I feel there needs to be a protected amount. Certainly sanctions in some instances can be fair, but not every person has the same issues and are affected by different situations that can affect their ability to attend an appointment. Yeah, I think that's the rub, that's the difficult issue, isn't it? Because we've talked about how sanctions, some people might say that they're unfair because they penalise people, as you've mentioned there, Jane. Of course, people who support sanctions would say, well, there needs to be, if you'll pardon the expression, that kind of carrot and stick measure, for want of a better phrase. And sanctions are kind of the stick in that respect. If you don't spend X amount of time looking for work, then you're going to be sanctioned and your UC is going to be reduced. Now, I understand the principle of it, and I'm not saying I disagree with the principle, but in practice, certainly what we see of a lot of it, citizens' advice, is people struggling with the impacts of that. But again, it's how do you square that circle, I suppose. Claimants suffering health conditions following COVID, mental health rules, more claimants with anxiety, unable to cope with attending interviews, and I think I saw someone mention in the chat earlier, different rules or perhaps training for staff. I personally think it's a bit of a combination, actually, of various different things. So Sharon, sorry, just to go back slightly, so you mentioned there about training for staff. I do think there's something in that. So when the COVID pandemic first hit, for want of a better phrase, and there was a big rise in the number of people claiming a UC, the DWP actually moved other people from within, like other staff within the DWP, essentially to become work coaches to be able to deal with the number of people that were now claiming it. What we then saw afterwards is that after sanctions were reintroduced, there was a rise in the number of sanctions that were applied, sometimes incorrectly, because there was this perception that maybe new work coaches were a bit overeager, if you'll pardon that expression. So personally, I think there's something in that. Sue, you've hit on something else as well. Claimants suffering health conditions, COVID, mental health, more claimants with anxiety, unable to cope with attending interviews, more people getting LCWRA after COVID. Yeah, again, so since the COVID pandemic, there has been, as I talked about earlier, big rise in the number of people claiming universal credit, particularly in relation to like mental health conditions. That's not to say that all of those people will get LCWRA, but yeah, if they don't stick to their claiming commitments, the things that they say they're going to do to get their UC, then yeah, they run the risk of being sanctioned. So, in terms of the sanction rates themselves, you've got different sanction rates depending on the person's circumstances, and it comes down to, is it a single claim for UC or is it a joint claim for UC if maybe you're a part of a couple? So if I'm single and I'm over 25, the sanction is £13.90 a day for as long as the sanction lasts, and I'll come on to how long in just a moment. Single and under 25, the sanction is £11.10 per day. So just remember though, if yes, the sanction rate is less, but if you're a single person under 25, you get less universal credit anyway. Oh, apologies, Jennifer. It's a limited capability for work and work-related activity. Apologies, I should have made that clear earlier. LCWRA for short, because limited capability for work-related activity is a bit of a mouthful. It's an element of UC that people can get if they have health conditions that affect their ability to work. Apologies, should have made that clear. Then if you are a couple and one or both of you is over 25, then it's £10.90 per day. And a couple where you are both under 25, £8.60 per day for as long as the sanction lasts. In terms of the sanction lengths, you've got different lengths of sanctions. So firstly, you've got what's called a low level sanction. So a low level sanction typically lasts for 7 days, plus however long it takes you to correct, and I do use that term loosely, correct the sanctionable behaviour. So I mentioned earlier, the most common reason for a sanction is failure to attend a work-focused interview. So missing an appointment with the job centre. That will be a textbook case of a low-level sanction, right? And like we said, that is 9 in 10 of all sanctions there. So if I got a low-level sanction, let's say I missed the appointment, it is 7 days plus however long it takes me to correct the behaviour, so i.e. reschedule and attend the appointment. And then I could be missing, £13.90 a day per day, £11.10, however long it takes me to, in this case, attend the appointment. Then you've got a medium level sanction. So medium level sanction is 28 days by default. It is 91 days though, so you're looking at 3 months, just about, if I've had a medium level sanction within the last year. So a medium level sanction would be things like if my work coach felt that I wasn't making enough of an effort to look for work. So maybe I agree when I sign on for UC, excuse me, maybe I agree when I sign on for UC, I'm going to spend 35 hours a week looking for work. And then my work coach looks at my journal and says, oh no, there's not 35 hours worth of work search here. You've not applied for enough jobs. This isn't 35 hours a week. Then I can get a medium level sanction. 28 days by default, 91 days if I've had one within the last year. Tracy, I can just see you saying, is it always 7 days for one missed appointment? It can potentially be longer if you've missed an appointment already, then it can potentially stretch on for longer. But for the first appointment, it will be 7 days plus however long it takes you to, in this case, attend the appointment. How come the sanction is higher for a single person? So for a single person over 25, it's £13.90 a day. So this is what's called the standard element of UC. For a single person over 25, you're looking about £424 a month is what you'd get, and then you'd be sanctioned £13.90 a day. Single under 25, £11.10 per day. So that one is lower, but if you're under 25, you get less universal credit anyway. So yes, the sanction rate is lower, but the standard element of UC itself, if you're under 25, is only £338 a month. So yeah, the sanction rate's lower, but you don't have as much to start with. With it being sort of single person versus a couple, it's because the couple rate of UC is not just twice the single rate. So for a single person over 25, your standard element of UC is £424 a month. For a couple where one or both of you is over 25, it's around about £500 a month, thereabouts, for both of you. For a couple, where one or both of you are over 25, it's £666 a month for both of you. It's not per person. And a couple where one or both of you are under 25, again, it's a bit lower, but that's because the couple rate of UC, it's not just twice the rate of whatever you'd get as a single person. So they have to adjust the sanction rates to kind of accommodate for that. All right. And then lastly, so medium level sanction is 28 days by default, 91 days if I've had one in the last year. And then your high level sanction, that is 91 days by default, 182 days, so you're looking at 6 months if you've had a high level sanction in the last year. Can the work coach use their discretion, or are they bound by policy or procedures? So if you, let's say that you miss an appointment, for example, with your work coach, if you have a good reason, then we can argue that I've had a good reason for missing the appointment. You know, maybe my childcare fell through, or I had a job interview, or whatever it might be. Then your work coach can say, all right, no. However, in my experience, it can depend on the work coach. As harsh as that might sound, some work coaches can be a bit more, shall we say, understanding than others. So they do have a certain level of discretion, but it depends on the work coach themselves, unfortunately. So, no problem, Rebecca. Let's say that I've been sanctioned and I disagree with it and I want to challenge it. What do? First step is gather whatever supporting evidence that you can. So like I said, if I missed the appointment because my childcare fell through, can I get a text from my childminder to confirm that? Okay. If I didn't apply for a job because it would exacerbate my mental health condition, for instance, can I get some kind of evidence to confirm that? You're going to need evidence to back up what we're saying here. But the first step is something called your mandatory reconsideration, where you are saying to the DWP, you've made the wrong decision to sanction me here, and I'd like you to look at this again. Thanks very much. If we want to appeal the decision, if we want to lodge that mandatory reconsideration, do it within 1 month. Wherever possible, try and appeal it within 1 month, because if you do it within 1 month, the DWP have to accept the request for the mandatory reconsideration. If I cannot do it within 1 month for whatever reason, I can appeal it. I can lodge that mandatory reconsideration within 13 months. But I will need to explain why is it that I couldn't do it within 1 month. And once you get past that 1 month time frame, the DWP, they don't actually have to accept the request. So your good reason might be I was ill, I was in hospital, maybe I was waiting for an appointment with Citizens Advice to get some support with challenging it, but there wasn't an appointment available in a month. Once you get past that 1 month time frame, you can do it within 13 months, but you need to explain your good reason for why you couldn't do it in a month. They don't have to accept it. As much as possible, try and do it within 1 month. There are a couple of ways that you can appeal. One is that there is a form that is freely available online. It's called a CRMR1 form. You can just Google CRMR1 and you will find it, right? And it will ask what benefit you're appealing, so universal credit, and it'll ask what you disagree with, why, and it'll ask for any evidence. Another way is you can ring the Universal Credit Helpline. You can appeal over the phone. Just make clear that you are asking for a mandatory reconsideration. Now, at Citizens Advice, we very often say to people, if you want to appeal it, do it in writing. So if you do want to ring and speak to someone over the phone, fine, but my recommendation would always be follow it up in writing. All right. Lastly, third way is you can just pop a note on your journal. Again, make clear that you are asking for a mandatory reconsideration. Right? What is it that you disagree with and why, and any evidence that you've got. Can I ask how this would work if the person suffering with their mental health cannot get in with the GP for evidence, or they are so depressed they struggle to attend a GP appointment? Okay. So, suffering with the mental health, can't get in with the GP for evidence, so depressed they struggle to attend a GP. So I would want to look at, have they had a history of mental health issues? Do they have some evidence that we could send off in that respect? Even we could look at things like maybe supporting statements from, say, carers or family. But really, we're going to need some kind of evidence. You know, is it possible? Could like a friend or a relative maybe help them gather it in that respect? Because the thing is, the DWP, that they're not going to just, if you'll pardon the expression, they're not just going to sort of take your word for it. We need some kind of evidence to back up what we are saying. If you've never challenged the sanction before, the clock has not started to challenge the decision. So it's 30 days. So you've got 1 month from the date that you are sanctioned. Ideally, try and do it within 1 month, but you can do it within 13 months if you do it late. So 30 days from when you are sanctioned is when that clock starts ticking, if you like. When you request the mandatory reconsideration, there is no real time scale, I'm afraid, for how long it will take to get a decision. They will make a decision when they make a decision. Could be a couple of weeks. I've had clients wait a couple of months. but they will look at the decision again, and it will be a different person to the person who originally decided to sanction you, but will not be the same person again. All right, but there isn't really a time scale in terms of how long it takes. Now, I'll be honest, not a lot of mandatory reconsiderations are successful. There were some statistics published recently. It's about 40% of mandatory reconsiderations are successful. Where people tend to be more successful with challenging the decision, though, is the next stage of the process. The next stage of the process is the independent tribunal. So when you get your decision back about your mandatory reconsideration, if you're still not happy with it, then you can appeal. You can take it to the next stage of the process. You can take it to an independent tribunal. The way that you do that is that you will need something called an SSCS1 form, or you can apply online. Try and do it once again. The timescales are kind of similar. Try and do it within 1 month of getting your decision on your mandatory reconsideration, because then the tribunal will accept it. If I can't do it within a month, then I can still do it within 13 months, but I need to explain what my good reason is that I couldn't do it within 1 month. So again, maybe you were waiting for an appointment or whatever it might be. All right. At this stage, when we go to the tribunal, it is no longer the DWP making the decision. All right, it is not the DWP's remit anymore. Few ways that tribunal can happen. So it could be in person, it could be over the phone, it could be virtually like we're doing now. You can opt for something called a paper-based hearing. A paper-based hearing kind of does what it says in the name. The tribunal will kind of just review the evidence that you've got and they'll come to a decision. Now, if I'm honest, statistically, we recommend that wherever possible, people try and attend the tribunal. People tend to be more successful when they actually attend the tribunal and speak to the tribunal themselves, because it's your opportunity to put across, if you like, your side of the story. Why was it unfair to sanction you, for instance? Now, on the flip side of the coin, just like it's your opportunity to explain why it was unfair to sanction you, the DWP might send somebody to the tribunal to explain why it was fair to sanction you. And the tribunal, it's not court in that sense. No one's going to go to prison, nothing like that. But it's just your opportunity to explain, why do you think it was unfair that you were sanctioned? Why was that sanction incorrect? If we have been sanctioned, there is some support available, in a sense. You have the option of something called a hardship payment. Just a reminder, folks, sorry, just because I'm conscious I'm going through a little bit. Shortly after the end of the session, you will get an email with a list of links relevant to what I've talked about today. So please don't worry about just sort of hearing it once and feeling like you need to take it all in. You will get some information to refer back to later. So if I've been sanctioned, there is some support available, in a sense. You have potentially the option of something called a hardship payment. So hardship payment is available specifically to people that have been sanctioned. It never, though, hardship payments do not cover the full amount of the sanction. They will cover about 60%. So as an example, I've said there, your standard element for a person over 25, it's not your standard element, your sanction rate for a person over 25, it's £13.90 a day. So if I get a hardship payment, it'll be about £8.34 that I get back. Now, like it says on the screen, I need to prove that my basic needs are not being met and meet certain criteria. So when I say meet my basic needs, I mean, for instance, I can no longer afford to pay my rent. I can no longer afford to buy food. I can no longer afford to pay my utilities. And it must be because of the sanction. Right? You will also, though, need to show the DWP that you have tried to get outside advice to try and kind of mitigate the effect of that sanction. So it might be you got debt advice, maybe you approached step change, maybe you came to, excuse me, maybe you came to citizens advice and talked about benefit entitlement. You can ask for a revision of a decision to impose a sanction. Oh, sorry, there's people popping messages in the chat there. You can ask for a revision of a decision to oppose a sanction at any time. Sanctions are one of the specified grounds for an anytime revision. That means sanctions can be challenged years after they were imposed. From CPAC. Oh, I'm not familiar with that one myself. I'll do a bit of digging on that one if I may. If it's any time revision, this means sanctions can be challenged years. But if it's an any time, but that would be more any grounds rather than any time. I'll do a bit of digging on that one, but my understanding is it's 13 months and then that is that. But I'll do a bit of digging on that if that's come from CPAG. What sort of proof are they looking for? How do you prove you can't buy food? So, in the past, I have seen clients where to apply for a hardship payment, they will need to for example, they'll come to citizen advice and they'll get, say, debt advice, right? And what they will do, the debt advisor, is they will go through a budget with the person and they will talk about, for example, how much do you spend on your food and your rent and so on, and they'll give you something called a standard financial statement, which is essentially just it's a budget essentially, but it's a budget that conforms to certain kind of legal standards. It carries a bit more weight than something I've just scribbled down on the back of a bit of paper, if you'll pardon the expression. So it might be that, like I say, I go for budgeting advice or debt advice, and I get that standard financial statement, that budget that I've worked through with another person trying to get some outside support to show, right, I can't afford food anymore, or I can't afford to pay my rent. So that would be the kind of evidence that they are looking for. All right. If you get your hardship payment, typically they are made the same day. I think it's not practiced often because you would need to give the DWP a very good reason for not challenging for years after the decision. Plus, after a month, they do not have to accept the MR or challenge. Yeah, that's kind of my thinking there, Georgia, because why would you challenge a sanction? You know, if I was sanctioned 5 years ago, I'm not going to try and challenge it now, surely. So, yeah, might be something in that. But I will double check that all the same. Yes, sorry. So you'll get your, let's say, your standard financial statement. That could be your evidence in that respect that you can't meet your costs. And then, assuming that you meet the criteria, you'll get your hardship payment. Now, the thing with the hardship payment, excuse me, people would need an appointment for money advice and external support to challenge a sanction. So to challenge the sanction, I mean, strictly speaking, if you are comfortable challenging the sanction on your own, no, you don't need an appointment. You might want an appointment. You might want to come to somewhere like Citizens Advice to get some support with that, but you don't need an appointment to challenge the sanction. In terms of the money advice and the budgeting, one of the criteria that the DWP will look at to get a hardship payment is, has the person sought external advice? So you might need an appointment for somewhere like debt advice or citizens advice or wherever it might be. For that, if you want a hardship, if you're wanting to go for a hardship payment, because the DWP will expect that you have tried to look for external support to try and ameliorate the effects of the sanction. But in terms of challenging the sanction, you don't necessarily need an appointment. If you're comfortable doing it on your own, then feel free. Of course, you might want to, but it's not a prerequisite in that sense. Now, if I get a hardship payment, it will be deducted from my UC moving forward. So think, you know, your UC is reduced because of your sanction, but then also I get my hardship payment, my UC is going to reduce yet further because I am now paying back that hardship payment. So the effect of the sanction, you know, we said earlier, like a medium level sanction, 28 days by default or 91 days, if I've had one in the last year, it's not just the case that you get to the end of the 91 days and everything's hunky-dory now. I get to the end of, say, my 91 days, my sanctions stopped, all right? But now my UC is going to be reduced anyway because now I've got to pay back that hardship payment. The issue is to get an appointment with CAB or money advice can be difficult. The waiting time can, yeah, I hold my hands up to that. I make no bones about that. It can be. As a service nationally, we're very busy. There are other avenues you can go. So if citizen advice is an option, I would want to look at maybe step change or national debt line, for example. So there are other avenues that are available. But yes, your standard allowance will be reduced because of, or rather universal credit will be reduced yet further for longer because of your hardship payment. There have been some changes to this, right? A little over a year ago, the government introduced something called the fair repayment rate. Now, what this did, the fair repayment rate, was it lowered the amount of universal credit that the DWP could take. So it used to be the case that the DWP were allowed to deduct, in practice, 25%. strictly speaking, they could take up to 40%. In practice, they didn't take more than 25% of your standard allowance. But what this fair repayment rate did was it lowered the threshold, the amount that the DWP could take from 25% to 15% instead. And the idea behind this was to enable people to keep a bit more of their money. Right? On paper, I'm all for that. If you're on a low income and you can save an extra 20 quid a month, that can make a big difference. Of course, the flip side of the coin is I've still got to pay that money back. So is it still just hanging over me for longer? So it's a bit of a double-edged sword in that respect. So just as an example, we've got Bobby, 28, single, no children, and lives alone in a one-bed flat. Right, just finished a 91-day sanction, £13.90 a day for not applying for a job his work coach put him forward for. He applied for hardship payment at the time of the sanction. He is 25 or over. He is single. His standard allowance is £424.90 a month. Because of that fair repayment rate, his standard allowance then is reduced by 15% to pay off his hardship payment once the sanctions ended. That leaves him with £361.16 for his day-to-day living costs. So his shopping, energy, his travel, phone, internet, all of that. £361.16. Just as an example. So I just want to spend just a quick bit of time talking about the effect of pay frequencies on universal credit. Because the frequency of when we are paid on universal credit can make a real difference to the amount that we receive month by month. I always say, personally speaking, I think universal credit is designed for people who are paid monthly, who are paid once a month and get the same amount of money every month. Then hooray, everything is, in theory, going to be okay for you in some respects. If you are paid more frequently than that, so if you're paid weekly, if you're paid fortnightly, if you're paid every 4 weeks, then potentially we can run into some issues that might reduce your UC. Now, what I mean by that, to give you an example, so on the screen here, we'll have a little calendar. So let's say January, February, March, and so on. This is what your universal credit will look like if you are paid weekly. If you are working on UC and you are paid weekly. So universal credit is based on what we call monthly assessment periods. It's based on the previous month's income. Okay? So let's say if I'm paid weekly, that means most of the time, per monthly assessment period, I'm going to get 4 lots of income. But there will be a few occasions a year where actually there's 5 weeks within that calendar month. So there's a few occasions where I get 5 lots of income every month. When that happens, that extra money will be taken into account. And because of that 55p taper rate that I mentioned earlier, for every £1 I earn from work, UC reduces by 55p. That extra money is either going to significantly reduce the amount of UC I get, or it's just going to wipe it out altogether, and maybe I don't get anything that month. If you are paid weekly on universal credit, you really, personally, I think, you kind of have the short end of the straw in that respect. Because if you imagine, this month there's 4 lots of income, so I'll be all right. Oh, that month's all right. And then, this month, right, I've got my extra week income there, so it's going to reduce my UC. You've got a month to get yourself back on track, and then, it's happened again. And then I've got 2 months to get myself back on track, and then my UC reduces again. If you're paid weekly, you've kind of got the short end of the stick, I'm afraid. If you are paid, if you are paid, I missed one. Yes, I have. If I'm paid fortnightly, then that means that usually per monthly assessment period, it means that usually there will be 2 lots of income per month. But there will be 2 occasions a year where I get 3 lots of income per month. And again, when that happens, it's either going to wipe out my UC altogether or at least significantly reduce it. Now, this graphic, by the way, like I haven't made this. This is from the DWP. So they know that this is an issue and this is their response to it. Essentially, budget. Work out when it's going to happen and budget. Then we have, if you are paid 4 weekly. So if I'm paid 4 weekly, that means most of the time I'll get one lot of income every monthly assessment period, all right? But there will be one occasion a year where I get 2. Again, same thing. It's either going to significantly reduce the UC I get, or it's just going to wipe it out altogether that month, and I'll just have to get by somehow, right? And then lastly, if I'm paid monthly. So if I'm paid once a month, and as long as my universal credit doesn't change in that respect, or rather if my wages don't change, that means my UC will stay the same, and I will be sort of floating along happy as Larry, in theory, at least. Universal credit works best if you are paid monthly. I'm afraid I will die on that hill. It's also an issue when a pay increase is backdated. Yeah, I completely agree, because that extra income, it'll be taken into account, and because of that 55p taper rate, it'll just get reduced. Or like sometimes you see, particularly around Christmas, for instance, your employer might say bring forward your December pay. So maybe you get paid a bit sooner, right? With the best will of the world, I'm sure they're trying to do something really positive for the staff. But actually, that being paid that bit sooner, if it falls within that same monthly assessment period for someone on UC, you can really muck up their UC claim potentially because of that extra income. All right. So just to cap us off then, thinking about just some key takeaways. So we've talked about sanctions, for example, and the effective sanctions can last long beyond the actual sanction itself. All right. Yes, there is support available. Think about things like your hardship payment and so on, but it does come at a cost, because it means that your UC is going to still be being reduced long beyond the sanction itself. Challenging sanctions where we think we have a good reason, whatever we think that good reason might be, challenging it as soon as possible, as soon as we can get that evidence, is going to be absolutely essential. All right. That does bring us to the end of the session there, folks. So just a reminder, on the screen there is just a link to 2 QR codes, one an introduction to universal credit and one advanced universal credit. If you want to find out more, you can use that code on the screen. I will make sure you get that in the email later on as well. As I said, it is valid until the 23rd of July. That doesn't mean you need to attend the course by then. You just need to have made the booking by then. All right. Just a bit more information. So that is our introduction to universal credit. It is a full day CPD accredited course that talks about, for example, the elements of UC, the process of making a claim, conditionality groups, sanctions, how changes in circumstances might impact on UC. A full day course, CPD accredited. Separately, we do also have our advanced universal credit course, again CPD accredited full day, talking about more kind of complex cases, if you like. So eligibility, exceptions where perhaps people might be outside the normal rules, if you like we've touched on today, pay cycles and their impact on UC payments, how we can support people with complex needs. Right.